All right, we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm excited to be here again today with one of my hypnotherapy instructors and mentors, Mary Lee LeBay. And my name is Jody Solberg. So if you are new to me, I am a certified master hypnotherapist, certified in master hypnotherapy, as well as transpersonal wellness coaching through Mary Lee. But I have been a hypnotherapist since 2001, as well as a coach. And my background is social and clinical psychology. And these skills that I've learned through Mary Lee have just really enhanced my business and have enhanced my ability to help people to heal from within. And today we're going to talk about something called chair therapy. So we're going to talk about healing inner and interpersonal conflicts through this really special hypnotherapy technique, extremely effective. And so, Mary Lee, I would love for you to introduce yourself and your background, and then let's dive in and start talking about, how chair therapy can be beneficial for us and our clients.
I'm very excited about this talk today, and thank you for inviting me on. And chair therapy is just super exciting and effective. But a little bit of background about me. I've been a certified clinical hypnotherapist since 1997, even though I was already doing past life regression for about 10 years before that. My background is heavily spiritual. I've been an astrologer and tarot reader since 1967, a few years ago. But since my hypnotherapy career, since 1997, I've written 6 books, and I'll just show you 3 of them: Exploring Past Lives, which is for the general public, and then Past Life Regression for practitioners, which is more a teaching book. And then my latest one, Mastering Hypnotherapy. And this one has all the techniques that I teach. So I'm really super proud about that one. I have a PhD in psychology, and I don't know, I'm a member of Mensa, if it matters. And anyway, I just enjoy this career so much. It's just opened doors for me in so many realms, from writing articles in national and international magazines to being on the radio, speaking at conferences, etc. So anyway, I'm really happy to be here today with you and talking about chair therapy, which is super powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's just one of many techniques that you teach in your courses and that you have in your books. And when I found you, Mary Lee, it was, something that, being in the Seattle area, both of us, I had heard of you. I'd known friends of mine who had studied with you at Bastyr University and Bellevue College. And I, like I said, had actually became a clinical hypnotherapist myself back in 2001 when I was in grad school for clinical psychology in Oregon, and really wanted to help people on a deeper level. And I had been working on the therapy side and the coaching side separate for many years at that point, and really wanted to work with people as whole people. Because what I found when I was helping people coaching in their businesses is that we're not just one piece of ourselves. We're not a business in a bubble. We are whole people, and that everything, deeply affects us, right? We have a lot of those subconscious blocks and barriers and inner conflicts and things that spill out into all other areas of our lives, whether that be our health, our relationships, our businesses, our work. And I wanted to be able to go deeper, and when we think, so oftentimes as, hypnotherapists, as well as coaches or other kinds of healers, often we think we're going to go in and work on something in a session with a client, and something else comes up, which is what we really need to work on. What the subconscious knows is the important thing to work on that day. And, with some of the limited training that a lot of people get in our field, they're not prepared for that. Often it might be script based, or they might have a certain protocol that they follow. But what I loved so much about the work that you did, and why I sought you out specifically to learn from you, not only just to learn how to work virtually, because that was something that was important to me, and I knew you had transitioned to having your own, you always had your own practice, but to having your own trainings, and that you were starting to do a hybrid with those, with the in person as well as the virtual work. But I wanted depth. I wanted to be able to be more client centered. I wanted to be able to meet people where they were, no matter what they brought into that session, whether it was a spontaneous regression or it was an inner conflict with someone that they couldn't work that out with in person. Whatever came into the session, I wanted to be able to be there fully present and skilled and able to go deeper with them.
Yeah.
And that's what I found. Because, like I said, it's not just one method, or one protocol or one technique. And you and I were just having a conversation about that there are some even, really robust trainings that you'll find, but the content is very limited still. It might take a long time to go through your training, but there are so many limitations to that. So I'd love for you to speak a little bit about that depth of what you teach and how client-centered it is. And then let's transition into specifically what chair therapy is all about.
Right. Well, so when I started, I got my clinical hypnotherapy certification in 1997, and I had a great education. It was 300 hours, and I really appreciated that. But a lot of what we did was script based, and so there are a couple of ways that different schools will train their therapists, and one is using scripts. So you would have a conversation with your potential client. You would find out all sorts of details about what they want to work on, a little bit about who they are, maybe some preferences and maybe some phobias. Um, and then you would spend some hours writing scripts that you think would address their issue perfectly. Or you look through tomes of script books. And I remember script books were so popular. Everybody was buying up script books because they had to find something that would be perfect for addressing their client. Excuse me. And so when I got out of my training, that was heavily how I was working. And it was so awkward. And, first of all, you'd spend a lot of time preparing. I was always filled with anxiety. Is this going to be the perfect script? Am I addressing it properly? Will I be successful? Will I get my client into a deep enough trance? There's all these factors that have to go into it. And it wasn't but a few sessions in that I thought, I can't work this way. It's not fair to the client. It's not doing our business any good. The reputation of not being effective, or, having it be questionable. Sorry, I need some water.
Oh, no problem.
And so I took some hints from Ericksonian hypnotherapy, and kind of created my own approach to client-centered hypnosis. And so what I teach is a method of putting the client into trance in a non-leading, gentle way, and then having it client-centered, as you said, in a dialogue with the client. So right away, right from the beginning, because they're giving feedback and we're noticing how they're imagining things, and how deep they are, because how well they're hooking into imagination, how immersed are they into the visualization, and then also the words they're using and the concepts and the material that's coming up out of that distinct and direct connection with the subconscious mind. And so we're, while we guide them into trance, we're also receiving that information from their subconscious mind that is guiding us where we need to go next. And so then over the years, which has been 28 years now, 29 years of practice, over those years, I went to a lot of seminars. I trained with a lot of amazing people and gathered all sorts of tools from NLP, from shamanic work, psychology, a lot of different modalities. And I've brought it all into the training that I have now. And so all of the techniques that I use in my business, which has been very, very successful, is what I teach my people. So my students will come away with all of these techniques. And like you say, I've also um, checked out all the different schools because as a business person, we have to see, who's the competition, what are they offering, at what price point, all of those things. And I cannot find another course anywhere that provides the amount, the number of distinct techniques that we can apply for our clients, the depth of the knowledge and the experience, and in the shortest amount of time and for a reasonable, affordable price. So I'm super proud of this training. So, yeah, and it's all online. So, I've trained people from South Africa, all across Europe, across Canada, the United States, Bahamas, Puerto Rico, Mexico. Um, Now we have a student coming in who's from Australia. We've had a few people from Australia, New Zealand. So we're because it's virtual, we can include as many people as possible.
Yeah. And that's such an amazing ability now with technology for us to do that. And, that you've been able to, like you said, take all these different techniques. And I know each time, because I have been in your live classes, so you have it all online in the portal, but then also offer live rounds of calls a few times a year. And you have one coming up soon in June. And every time I learn something more, something different. I know you said this time there's going to be something that you are pulling out that you haven't done in years.
Yeah,
And so it's always evolving. And that's what I love so much about what we do is it's never the same thing. Never gets boring. And like you said, especially being client centered, it's always just evolving in the way that it is supposed to for that client.
right.
And it's not about like, okay, I have this script and then the person shows up and then I use the script. And if it isn't quite right or it isn't what they actually are presenting with when they're there, then, I'm feeling like, what do I do? And so that's what I love about, like you said, so many distinct techniques that I can say, oh, I know what to do with this. This person's
Right.
coming up with that. Let's do chair therapy. So let's talk about what chair therapy is and when and how we would know to use that. In learning these types of techniques, what's beautiful about it is whether it's, their own inner, it's always an inner conflict, but that own inner conflict or a conflict that they may have had currently or in the past with someone else that is unresolved. Hey, what would you like to share with everyone watching today about chair therapy and the way that you do it? Because again, it's different than often they may have learned somewhere else.
Right. So some people practice chair therapy by having the client get up and actually move from chair to chair to get different perspectives. Some have many people in the room, that sort of thing. The way that I like to keep things very simple and uncluttered and uncomplex, not complex, so that we can really cut through and resolve something And then if there are other issues or other people involved, we can do it again with, with that issue and that person. So whenever somebody has a relationship issue, and that can be with their parents, their children, their spouses, girlfriends, boyfriends, um, bosses, coworkers, whoever that is. I mean, we are a social society, and so we're going to be interacting with people all the time, and oftentimes there will be conflicts or differences of character, personality, or opinions, perspectives. And so this gives this perfect opportunity to really sort it out and find out, or being able to express, and also finding out what the other person is thinking on a deeper subconscious level. I also use this technique for grieving when you've lost somebody, having those final words if it feels like there hasn't been closure, or maybe somebody moves away or you haven't seen them in a long time, or ghosts you, they're just not there, but you feel like there's more to talk about. What was interesting is the normal way that I learned it was, to imagine that other person. So the typical way of doing this therapy, your client is already in trance. So they're connected to their higher self, their subconscious mind, and they're receiving information from their subconscious. And so once that's established, we have them imagine that the other person in front of them. And it could be somebody who has passed on, or it could be a parent, somebody that's in their life presently. And we establish communication. The other thing is, I've done this also with when people want to speak with their spirit guides. So you could also do it that way. So you can, uh, I don't know, use this technique in so many ways. So once that person is there, once the communication is established, um, the the you can ask, you can have your client ask a question to the other person, or you can have them simply say what they want to say. And then when they're finished, then you want them to listen. Oftentimes we think, well, my mom would always say this, and we just assume that's what your parent is going to say, or that's what the other person is going to say. But it's very important that the client is simply receptive. And so they're receiving the words, and oftentimes they're surprised. They're like, oh my goodness, that person really did feel bad about that, or, whatever, whatever that response is. I was teaching this, and it had to have been 20 years ago. It was a long time ago. And I was teaching this to a group of students, and I had a demo person. We always do demonstrations in class. So I asked somebody, if they would like to have a conversation with someone. And this female client, she said, yes, I need to talk with my mother because I've just been visiting her. My sisters and I have been visiting, and we realized that my mother just has never connected with us. She has these barriers, and we can't seem to feel like we really have a connected relationship with her. And so we did the work. She communicated, she expressed to her mother, we really want to feel connected to you, and we just feel that there's that barrier. And the at the same time, I had her looking at her mother. So, it's important for them to really look. And sometimes I use language like, if you could look inside, let's say your mother, the other person, with the eyes of an ascended master, like a Buddha or a Jesus or somebody who could look right into their very soul, what is it that you would see? And this is so powerful for people, especially if the person is a an antagonist. They've harmed that person in some way. Now they're getting to see what's inside the soul of that person. And oftentimes they'll say, oh my gosh, they were harmed, they were tortured, they were abused as a child, or they feel empty inside, or there's all sorts of descriptions that they use. In the case of my demonstration, she said, I see her in this shell, and there's these layers of shells, and she's way inside there. And so we did, some visualization work of opening that up for her mother. And her mother emerged, and it was like a breath of fresh air. And so then we finished up the session. They talked, and the mother said, oh, I'm going to try. I've always wanted to connect with you, but I couldn't, I didn't know how. And I just felt blocked from that. And so, we completed that work. And at the end, my student had said, normally I would call my mom during the week, and I think I'm just going to wait a week. I think I just need to sit with this a little while. And I said, well, that's fine. Um, and about 2 days later, she texted me and said, oh my gosh, my mother called me, which she never does. My mother never reaches out. She called me and she said, I've been thinking about it, and I really know that I've not connected well with you and your sisters. And I just want you to know that I'm really trying, and I want to bridge that gap. And my student was absolutely flabbergasted. She said, my mother never talks to me like that. She never calls, and this is crazy different, right? And
Wow.
so that was when I first realized that this work, because I had not been trained that these things were possible.
Mhm.
And it was just chair therapy. We're going to have a conversation, right? And so I thought, well, this is very interesting. And so then over time with my clients, I would try to take it to that extra level. And I had a client who was really struggling with a coworker. My client was a little older, probably mid 50s, had been there a long time, was mature and stable, and you know, I don't know, just a hard worker. And this other coworker was a young girl, probably in her 20s, and she said, "This girl comes in very inappropriate um, clothing. It's not appropriate for the office. She won't talk to me. She won't give me the files that I need so I can do my work. She's very, abrupt and rude to me. And I just can't stand working this way. Why can't she just, you know, everybody do their job and get this done?" So we had a conversation, and she had a conversation with this young lady. And in this case, she imparted some wisdom and some advice, as well as communicating with her. The next time I saw my client, she said, it was unbelievable. The very next day, she came in with appropriate clothing, and she's been friendly, and she is cooperative, and everything at work is going well. And
Wow.
I can tell you story after story after story with this technique. This is so powerful if you have any issues with another person. Imagine a parent with a child who is starting to misbehave, whether it's a small child and they're acting out, or it's a teenager where they're maybe experimenting with drugs and alcohol, or rebellion of some sort. Just imagine the power of being able to impart wisdom and love and support in that context. And we don't do any abusive things like yell at them. Chair therapy in the traditional way sometimes would involve, take this pillow and smash them and punch the other person, scream at them. And it's just not necessary. Because here we do it so much more heart centered. What would be a positive, constructive thing that you could share with that other person that would allow them to grow and change and improve and therefore have a better relationship? Have you found that with your clients?
Absolutely. It really shifts everything. I mean, it shifts the energy, it shifts the intention. I feel like when they resolve that within themselves, other people can feel it. And it, like you said, it's much further reaching than we ever realize that it's going to be. And it's
Yeah.
mind blowing when that happens. Absolutely. And like you said, it's not about, like taking out your frustration and just beating up on the person in your mind. It really is about resolving it and healing those wounds. And that just changes the dynamic completely.
Yeah, yeah, and it's beautifully done. I mean, it's done in a heart-centered, loving way. And so another way that we apply it, once you learn these techniques that I teach you, there are all sorts of variations that can happen within that. And one of the variations that I started playing with again, probably a few decades ago, um, was to have them change places. So, um, one example comes to mind that was kind of interesting. So I was working with a client, and she was really complaining about her boss, and her boss was complaining about her. Her boss didn't like her, and she was putting all the blame on the boss. And as I was listening to her, I could tell that, maybe she needs to know a little bit more about herself, take a little more responsibility on herself for the dynamic between these two people. And so, in the middle of chair therapy, I always talk with my hands. In the middle of chair therapy, I asked her, imagine floating up out of your body and over into your boss's body and perspective. And she's floating up and in your body. So now that, and there's a little more language that goes into that, but they've changed places. And now my client was in the perspective, sitting behind the boss's desk, looking at herself over there across from her. And then the boss was in the perspective of her. And so I said, well, what do you see? What do you notice? And it was so eye opening for her. And I can't remember because it's been a long time ago, but she recognized some of her behaviors and attitudes, some of her work ethic, and maybe some disrespect, that sort of thing. And she said, "Oh my gosh, I see how," and maybe the way she was talking to the boss or something. And she said, "I can see why I'm feeling irritated as myself is talking to me, however you want to explain that, as I'm receiving that information." And the light bulbs just went off completely. And so she started changing herself, and the boss at some higher subconscious level was also participating. So anyway, of course, you bring them back into their own perspective before you bring them out of trance.
Yes.
Um, but she was she was so much more self-aware and
Mhm.
started to change her own perspectives. And within a week or two, she said everything had smoothed out with her boss. It was so powerful.
That's amazing. Yeah, absolutely. Because when we can increase that awareness, that self awareness of, what things do look like from the other side, then we can change how we're responding in situations, which also then the dynamic to where the other person then can respond differently as well. It gives a really great opportunity for them to see, what is it like on the other side and what does it look like from the outside, from their perspective, looking back like that mirror. And so I love that there are, like you said, so many variations and combinations,
Yeah,
because we can often go into a situation and pinpoint, okay, this is what needs to get resolved, and then pull in another technique in order to resolve that situation before we can move on. And so this is just one piece of what you teach in your course, one of those techniques out of dozens of techniques really that we can utilize. And I love that, you do provide structure and at the same time flexibility, that there are these techniques and there are different words that we can use with those techniques that are really effective, but that we can utilize those in a way that flows. It's not so rigid that it's like, well, just do this and that's it. It's, learn this technique and then weave it in
right.
whatever way it needs to happen in that moment. And that's definitely my favorite part of, what I have learned from you is that freedom, that flexibility, and that flow to meet the client wherever they are and with whatever comes up for them. And so, like you said, whether it's, with someone who is currently in their life, like a boss, or someone who's passed, or someone they're estranged from, or that was a great example that you gave. I'm thinking of a specific client right now that I'm working with grief and loss. Sometimes with a death, but also sometimes for somebody who is just no longer in their life, or they said maybe ghosted them, or they are no longer speaking to. There's so many different ways that we can utilize chair therapy.
Yes, yes, and it is just a piece of the puzzle. So one of my trainers early on, his method was the first session you do secondary gains and parts therapy. The second session you're going to do object imagery, and the third session you're going to do inner child work. And it was all plotted out, and every single client was going to go through this method. And I looked at that and I thought, well, that's interesting.
Mhm.
And I never did it that way, because in a given session, I could easily use 6 or 8 different techniques, because it's just weaving in and out and meeting the client right where they are and starting there and receiving that information from their higher self, what it is they need. Oftentimes it's not what they say they need.
Yeah.
An example, I had a client who came in for weight loss, and typically, okay, weight loss, we're going to do this kind of, process. And in many cases, people who have weight loss programs will have a protocol, that they'll go through. But in the very beginning, we use something called an empowerment symbol, which is a technique that I created early on that allows the client to receive a gift in their safe space. Right at the very beginning, they receive a gift from their higher self, their spirit guides, wherever they feel that's coming from. And in the case of this client, in my mind, it's like, oh, we're doing weight loss. So, secondary gains, parts therapy, whatever. And we're going to go through for weight loss. And her gift was a pink quartz heart. And so she took that in her hands. And I said, well, what does this mean to you? And she said, it's reminding me that I need self-love. And I realized, oh, before we can ever go into weight loss, the first thing we need to do is self love. So that session was all about self love, and, why she didn't have it, how she could get it, what that would feel like. uh, everything needed to create that foundation, because without that self-love, she's more likely to self-sabotage and to have trouble with the weight loss. And
Mhm.
so the subconscious mind just elegantly gives us the clues, and we just follow them like cookie crumbs throughout the whole session.
Absolutely. And that's what being client centered is all about, is letting their subconscious take the lead on this is what needs to be unraveled, unfolded next. And so, like you said, we can just weave that in. I love that imagery of, that artistry of weaving in these techniques to follow where they're leading. That it really is their work that they're doing, where they're guiding and facilitating that, but it's what they need in that moment. And like you said, some people need object imagery first, and some people need inner child or chair therapy first. It's not so regimented where it's like, okay, we do this and then that. And I love that you do provide in your course flows, like kind of like a little workflow of,
Right,
they're dealing with emotional pain or grief or physical pain. Here's an idea of different techniques that you could utilize for that. But again, it's as it comes, we choose which technique is going to be the best fit in that moment. And that is something that is unveiled as we're doing the work. It often, like you said, is not what we think or what the client thinks that it is, because that's more of the effect than the cause.
hmm,
And that's exactly things like weight loss, for example, or addictions, things like that. Often that is the symptom, not what actually started it in the first place. And
yeah,
so it is really important to realize that, if we're only focused on, yes, this specific protocol for weight loss, for example, but we never get to the self-worth part, it's often going to manifest in perhaps a different way. It's going to
right,
be the same root coming up as a weed somewhere else. And
right,
so, yeah, that was, that really paramount piece of what I wanted in taking your training. And what I got from that was, okay, how can we heal that root? I always give this imagery for people of the weeds, right? Coming up in the yard, and then you just mow them
mhm,
over, and they keep
right,
popping up, and they mow them over. And what we do is really get to that root so we can pull that out, heal it, and replace it with something that's going to serve and support them better. And when you do that, then you're not just dealing with the same thing, perhaps in a different form over and over and over again.
absolutely. And the other piece of that, like in the training, you're going to learn all those techniques. But my training is the only one out there that also gives an entire program on past life regression. And, people think, oh, past life regression, that's just, kind of an, auxiliary thing you can do for fun. But past lives is, oftentimes where those roots lie. And so we also have to go into those lifetimes where addictions are held. If there's addictions in many different lifetimes, if you're trying to heal it here in this lifetime, you're always going to be pulled back into it because of the influence on your soul of these other lifetimes. So we go into those lifetimes and actually do the healing there, whether it's addictions or traumatic pain, whether it's emotional or physical trauma, different issues that have happened. Money, money issues often stem from other lifetimes. And so we go in and we actually correct what's happening there. And then when we work on the person here, it's so much easier because first of all, they know themselves better, but they're not getting pulled back by those other lifetime factors. So that's why I have married the two into one course. I used to teach them separately, and I realized that people who were practicing hypnotherapy but did not have a really sound foundation in past lives um, just wouldn't be as effective. And people who were practicing past lives, more like sightseeing tours, would not have the tools of NLP, hypnotherapy, psychology, shamanism that I was teaching over here. So, in order to graduate the most powerful and effective uh, therapists from my course, I married the two together. And I just think it's a very important factor to be well versed in both those arenas.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, it's important because they spontaneously regress. Need to know what to do. And I think that a
Right.
lot of that comes from, like you said, you were doing past life regressions before you
Mhm.
were doing the therapy. So you know the difference between the two, of, like you said,
Mhm.
just doing more of the sightseeing tour versus being able to go in and do that deep inner healing work. And so, I'm sure you saw over and over again the patterns and what people were bringing forward with them, and has then learned how important that was to be able to support them in that instead of just saying, well, that's what happened. And
Right.
so, like now you have to figure out how to deal with it, in this life. Like we get to support people in that because often there are those cycles and patterns, whether that's, past lives, ancestral, there's so many different ways that we can help people with these past traumas, this life, you know, like I said, ancestral wounds and traumas, those past life traumas. We've been talking a lot too with the work that I've been doing lately with, womb regressions in between lives and all of these, beautiful things that we can help people with because they really do carry those throughout their lives. And if it's not addressed and it's not processed through and healed, then they're just repeating that cycle and passing that on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you think about it, um, until the 21st century, how often did people actually have therapy? I think maybe in indigenous tribes, they would have a shaman, or maybe in certain religions, they'd have a priest who would help you through your traumas. But for the most part, people just dealt with it and moved on, or buried it, stuffed it,
Yeah.
or they died in the middle of the trauma and had no opportunity to really integrate those experiences. And so those experiences, we are the culmination of all of our past lives and actually future lives too. And we talk about timelines in the course, but we have that influence because it's in our soul, it's in our subconscious mind. And then here we are in this life, living this life, but also with all that influence. And so, um, two things. One is to go in and be able to um, soften the traumas or soften the things that are negatively impacting us, and also go in and find all the wisdom and the talents and purpose and all the things that we can enhance and incorporate into us now. And then understanding that every choice we make, all of our thoughts, everything that we're doing in this life is affecting all those other lifetimes as well, and certainly creating a pattern for our future. And so the importance of that becomes really relevant and stark, I guess, to realize that our thoughts and actions and morality, our character, influences and is being influenced. And how can we do that the best we can?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very profound. That's for sure to realize that. And so I know we could talk about this forever because we often do.
Right.
But I would love for you to share with everyone just, a little bit about who your course is for, how it works, and when the next round of live calls are.
Okay. Well, the course is for anyone who wants to be a holistic healer or coach, and it's perfect. And I've trained people who are coaches, massage therapists, naturopaths, acupuncturists, nutritionists, um, or you might just have and past life regressionists, and you might have a more generalized practice. But anybody who's going to be in the healing arts, so, and Reiki practitioners, energy workers, psychics, all of that, because for me, the hypnotherapy in past life is the glue that binds it all together. So, even if, like, I've had a lot of naturopaths say, well, I'm working with a client and we're doing all the tinctures and the herbs and we're doing everything we can, but there's a block that we can't get past. And then they apply the hypnotherapy to that client, and that's released, and then the client is able to respond well to whatever other protocols they're using. Same in coaching, where the client gets to a certain point and maybe they're resistant to, following through with certain uh, tasks on their item list or whatever, and we can break through those resistances. So there, for all of that, the course is excellent for parents if you want to work more effectively with your children. I really wish that I had all this knowledge when my kids were little. I think their childhood would have been completely different, and I would have been able to, help and support them in a much more substantial way. So really, it's for anyone, but primarily I'm teaching people who want to begin their practice. It's the full range of hypnotherapy and NLP techniques, and the full range and substantial course in past life regression. And it's set up so that you can register anytime, and the the you can start studying. You can go through the course online in order to get your certifications as a master hypnotherapist and a master past life therapy specialist. You do also have to complete the 20 hours of live support calls and 30 hours of practice sessions that you just turn in a report on each of those practice sessions. And so most people are able to do that within 2 to 3 months. And so the live support calls happen 3 times a year. The next one is starting June 3rd, and we'll go for 10 weeks. We do 2 hours a week. And in this, and the hours and days change, but this round we're doing Tuesday mornings from 8 to 10 in the morning Pacific time. That way, hopefully, we can, get a lot of people from the East Coast, and we have a person from Europe and somebody from Australia. So they're coming in from all parts of the world for this training. And so you go through the 10 calls. If you miss a call, I always send out a replay, and you can get credit for the replay by just giving me bullet points that demonstrate that you did watch the entire film or the entire video. And when you've completed that, you'll have your certifications. Now, beyond that, we have a private Facebook group that provides a lot of support. You can ask questions, you can get help, you can announce your events and your progress, whatever you want. And we are a group of people who are cooperative and collaborative rather than competitive, which I've been to a lot of courses and it's competition, right? And we know that there's more than enough people out there to work on. There's plenty of people to share. And so I love the fact that we collaborate. And I have students that graduated from my courses years and years ago that still stay in touch, and they'll ask me questions. I'm always here because my philosophy is, if you've graduated from my program, I want you to be successful. this is how this wonderful work gets out to more people. And, the only way that happens is if you run a successful business. So I'm always here to support and encourage. And so are the other students. I think it's just a lovely group of people. So anything else we need to add to that?
I think that covers it. I do feel like I completely agree with what you're saying as someone who does show up and always loves to learn from you, but also loves to support the other students. Like you said, it's such a wonderful community that you have built and that support you provide. Go ahead.
Well, I have one other thing I forgot to
Okay.
mention. You can repeat the online course all the
Yes.
time. It's up there. You have, constant access to that. And you can repeat the calls like Jody does,
Amazing.
which is very smart. A lot of the students will keep coming to the calls. There's no additional charge for that. Once you've paid for the course, you get to be involved as often as you want. So the students have reported that every time they come to a series of calls, they're going to learn something new. I'm either presenting something new or the demonstrations are different. And as you're building your practice, you can come to the calls, and now you're going to have um, more experienced questions, right? Because now you've been living it and in there, and oh, what do I do in this case? Or I have a client I need help with. And so you can always come to the calls and get support.
Absolutely. That's important to know. And I would take advantage of this for anybody watching who's interested because Mary Lee just gave me a little bit of a hint that this may be the last time at such an affordable price point because, everything's going up and she keeps adding more and more to this training. And so, it's something that I feel like is so reasonable for everything that we get in this like really comprehensive program. And you're so generous with your time and so generous with allowing us to come back and have access to that always. And so I just appreciate you so much and cannot recommend your course highly enough. So if anybody is watching and you start getting a little nudge that maybe this is for you, feel free to reach out to either Mary Lee or myself and to go to the link. I'm making sure it's under all the videos. Wherever you can find this, you're going to be able to find that link, and it's up here on the screen as well. And the live calls start in just a couple weeks, so no time like the present.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you a special bonus, and I haven't told you this yet, but
Okay.
anybody that signs up with your link, I'm going to send you a hard copy of my latest book, Mastering Hypnotherapy. It's an amazing resource that you'll turn to throughout your career, I promise you. So just for your people, I'm going to drop ship a copy of the book to each of them.
Thank you so much. That's so wonderfully generous of you. So, everybody
Yeah.
watching, take advantage of that. It's an amazing book. It really is like the textbook of hypnotherapy and it's the latest edition. So, Mary Lee, thank you so much for being here today with me. It's always such a pleasure to be able to have these conversations with you and share your wisdom and knowledge and training with the world. I appreciate you. And is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
No, but thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be here with you. And I'll see you June 3rd in class.
I will see you then. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.